All right, that was scary. And I'm going to go ahead and, first I need to make,
It's that little
David.
voice is so creepy. Recording in progress.
If I can find David again, I'll make him a co-host. David, are you still here? There you are. All right, David, make co-host. Yes. And I have to mute everyone. Unfortunately, you won't be able to unmute yourselves because we have to worry about internet trolls. But everyone's now muted. And Cassandra, I believe you have the floor.
I do. I'm going to start by introducing the amazing Jonathan, who is going to read for us. But let me do his bio first. In 1998, Jonathan Penton founded unlikelystories.org, an electronic journal of literature and art. Since then, he has lent editorial and management assistance to a number of literary and artistic ventures, such as Mad Hat Inc., the New Orleans Poetry Festival, Rigorous, and Big Bridge. In 2005, he founded the wonderful Unlikely Books, which publishes 3 to 5 books of poetry a year. He has organized literary performances and performed himself across the United States. His poetry books are Last Chap with Virgin Press in 2004, Blood and Salsa and Painting Rust with Unlikely Books in 2006, Prosthetic Gods with New Sins Press, Wing City Chapbooks 2008, Standards of Sedity at Lit Fest Press in 2016, and the free e-chapbook Backstories, which you can download from Argotist eBooks. Jonathan, are you going to set us up by reading us something, please?
I will. And as the regulars have heard me say many times before, I'm not all that prolific. So what I do most weeks is read something that we published over the past week at unlikelystories.org. And this week I'm super excited because we published Vernon Fraser this week, a fantastic jazz poet, and I'm going to read a piece by him, Playing Connected. Iodine sherbet. Catheters turn snake in the floor. Slither, ambiguous, leather. For toxic willow pageants, cascade merchants align, cranking out their crude ultimatum. Packets to launch. The proverbial as a je ne sais quoi. No empty threat, though drained. Before hands clank, their scrotal buzzer. Tanking a conniption fit. Medium large or pick an X. A carefree wallow. Muffles their insurgent pipeline banter. Again, that was by Vernon Fraser, Playing Connected. All right, and we're going to go back to Cassandra now. Cassandra is an award-winning writer, scholar of prose poetry, and professor of writing and literature in Melbourne, Australia. Her most recent books of prose poetry are Pre-Raphaelite, Leftovers, and Fugitive Letters. She is currently writing a book of prose poetry on the atomic bomb with funding from the Australia Council. Cassandra co-wrote Prose Poetry and Introduction and the Anthology of Australian Prose Poetry. She is commissioning editor for Westerly Magazine. Cassandra, will you read us something?
Yeah, I've got one of my Picasso poems. It's based on the painting La Rêve. Picasso's paintings line the walls of your memory palace, fevered, twining images in a swing of paints. You trace the round, thick lines on the canvas, and I feel your finger pads tracing the curve of my thigh. In the center of the room, a Peter Pan collar and cuffs chart your physical obsession, the remnants of your golden muse. Among the ruins, I hear the rhythm of a lullaby in the oversimplified lines of La Rêve, but you are listening to the secrets hidden in his last handwritten letter. You tell me you are not Picasso, but I lay naked on a red cushion and wait for adrenaline to restart your heart. Now, Mark is not here, but we know it's not a Lit Balm without his bio and without a poem. So I have pre-recorded one with him. He even has the added bonus of saying, ask me a question. I'm sure that people will be interested to hear me respond to something a little bit crazy. So let me do the bio and then you'll be able to see Mark read. Mark Vincennes is an Anglo-Swiss American poet, a fiction writer, a translator, an editor, a publisher, a designer, multi-genre artist, and musician. He's published 16 books of poetry, including more recently, Leaning into the Infinite, The Syndicate of Water and Light, Here Comes the Night Dust, Einstein Fledermaus, and The Little Book of Earthly Delights. Vincenz's newest collection, A Brief Conversation with Consciousness, is forthcoming this fall from Unlikely Books. And I saw a picture, Jonathan. It has a beautiful cover with a bee and it's slightly salmony pink. And you were worried about the color, but I think it's beautiful. There it is. So that is, that's the latest one in the millions that are out and about. An album of music, ambience and verse, Left Hand Clapping, is forthcoming from Tree Torn Records. Vincenz is also a prolific translator, and he's translated from, come on, we know this, German, Romanian, and French. He's published 10 books of translations, most recently, Unexpected Development by award-winning Swiss poet and novelist, I hear you say Klaus Mertz, yes, White Pine 2018, and it was a finalist for the 2016 Cliff Becker Book Prize in Translation. His translation of Klaus Mertz's selected poems in Audible Blue is forthcoming from White Pine Press. Vincenz is editor and publisher of Mad Hat Press and publisher of New American Writing. He's lived all over the world, people from Brazil to China to Iceland to India. He was born in Matilda Hospital on the Peak in Hong Kong, but now lives on a farm in rural western Massachusetts overlooking Herman Melville's Greylock Mountain, and where there are more muskrats, long-eared bats, and ermine than people. So, Mark, on video, will you take us away?
Okay, give me just a second here.
If you missed the Halloween show, it's got a little bit of a Halloween theme to it too.
So this poem's called Cliffhanger. All hail the monster on this Hallows Eve. Watch the pandemonium unfurl, the damsel in distress as the dull dawn rumbles. A shadow stands watch over your grave. Don't recoil from the long years of time. Wait until day mushrooms into itself. Know this way melds every living shadow, fills itself within us until we find our material self in unison at the top of the belfry with the first rush of wings within the roots of the sun. Let the voices boil up. First, simmer on a low heat. Gas is best, that assured flame and purple robes. Don't sob. We're perennials, monster. And we know how to glow in the dark. Where did you lay your eggs? Do you leap from the branch to branch, or crawl like the ivy, or the lashes to your frame a ladder among the clover? Be your full material self. Press your face to mine. Let me be a swallow to your hawk. You've named a tree for me? Cross the meadow and turn away from the stairs. Are you still lying in waiting? Don't fear the crowds in the street. Return to your roots, your humble abode, where hinges are rusty and voices barely audible. Recently, no wind arrived with your premonition looking for you, scouting you out in the darkness. Me, I still sink, but you, from the moment of your creation, encased in a shaft of light, not holy or risen, but brimming, overflowing, a gift I dreamed in the high branches.
So I have a question for you.
Sure.
If you could resurrect 3 poets from the dead, who would they be and why?
Good question. Which poets would I resurrect from the dead? I think they'd have to be Walt Whitman, Sylvia Plath, and Emily Dickinson. And for these reasons, Walt Whitman, because he found the lyric in the American countryside. He found that metaphorical, deep, shamanic spirit of the American countryside, but he didn't fulfill it in his poem. For Sylvia, I'd say, what the hell? Was Ted so bad that you had to give up? You were so close to being one of the best, and then you just let it drop. And not to mention your kids. And Emily, I should say, had you grown into your old, mature age that you should have, you would have been even greater than you were. But you were great. That's what I'd say.
All right. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started with David Blair, our guest MC. He always does a fabulous show. David Blair lives and works around Boston. I saw him on the street of Boston the other day. I asked him if he was the famous David Blair. He just looked at me and said no. It was weird. Thomas Lux chose his first book of poetry, Ascension Days, for the Del Sol Poetry Prize in 2007. His second book, Friends with Dogs, was a must-read selection for the Massachusetts Book Awards. And his third book, Arsonville, was published as part of the Green Rose series by New Issues Poetry and Prose. A graduate of Fordham University and the Creative Writing Program at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, Blair is taught in the MFA Writing Program at the University of New Hampshire and in the online Master's Degree Program in Creative Writing at Southern New Hampshire University. Mad Hat Press published his new collection of poetry, Barbarian Seasons, in 2020. David, do you have a poem for us today? As a co-host, you should be able to unmute yourself.
All right, here's a poem from Barbarian Seasons for Goya's Public Ice Skaters of Spain. Mostly nothing between my mind and poem. I do not regard the wet night that dries away from the house on the rubber roof. Dry snow always a misnomer as it chases itself there into and out of drifts until the snow sticks. The town rink keeps full of fascinating cold, from the hard shine of its oval to the brown wooden rafters, to the metal stands, the penalty boxes, scoreboard box, team benches, cinder block walls that do not screen out the cold, with dreaming goons and figure eights to ads for insurance agents and dental smiles and restaurants. I do not sharpen my skates. I don't care if they look dude-like or femme, and never did. Was always a dork, a schmoo. I go slow. I keep upright. I sweat and ice over at the same time. Outside night, outside daytime, surrounded by miniature figure skaters, blue tops, hockey pucks, hoodlum loompas, the middle-aged and the old, and teenagers who also remember the rink's other places, all of them outdoors in the snowflakes, sudden stars, nobody talented. Well, thank you for asking me to read a poem. All right, so today's readings, we have a kind of a friendship theme to today's readings, and Sam Witt is going to be our first reader. Sam Witt is the author of 3 books of poetry. It's hard to get books of poetry published, so his second book, Sunflower Brother, came out after his first book, Everlasting Quail. Both of them won awards, and his most recent book is Little Doomsday Clock. Think about that title. He spells doomsday in the archaic way, doomsday, the English way, the way with a foot in the irrational, with a foot in a time that took salvation and damnation seriously, and which for all our progress probably took the eschatological zaniness more seriously than we do. That's Sam for me. He's always trying to connect us in time and space, reaching through language and back through language, and he is a poet of uncomfortable political and personal awareness. Sam is also massively unafraid of darkness and poetry. He's up on the roof trying to wake us, his neighbors, up about the fires and the floods and the way bombs and bombed out places and people look as they turn away from you, perhaps after wrapping a rope or a rusty chain around your ankle and descending into shoal or the dried swimming pools of Arizona or wherever. Sam also asked the questions about what unites people, what holds them together as individuals and also as relational beings, and what are these limits and how much is lost when we lose people and the limits that unite them in unglamorous and anti-egotistical actual relationship. Or as Didi Jackson writes in her new book, each of us must come to the edge of the other, either in this life or the next. Not only do people need to read Sam's books of candor, I think they should be read widely, thought about, discussed, deeply learned. Once a friend had dinner with Sam and she came in the next day and said, boy, oh boy, I had a great dinner with Sam Lit. He has read everything. Sam's my friend and I've read his poems for years, astonished by their uncompromising need to be with people in extreme situations, to find a way forward for the breath, for the need to live, for the sentence. And I also feel that people should celebrate him as one of the most innovative Southern poets, a poet who renews the language of the Gothic for dark political times and different postmodern circumstances. Once Sam and I were walking to a bus stop after work at the New England Institute of Art in a blizzard, and there was, get this, thunder snow. Of course there was. I would say that his relatives are Faulkner and Poe and Flannery O'Connor, but also Charles Wright and Frank Stanford and C.D. Wright. And he is a close kindred spirit to another great contemporary poet from the South, best friends from Iowa, another extender of language, Doug Powell. Though I was lucky to hear and find them in their work when they lived around here, I actually have never gotten to hear them read on the same night. And it's been one of my ambitions to get them to read together. Sam's poetry challenges me and is always new. So thank you for reading today, Sam.
Thank you, David. That's so kind. I really appreciate that. I am afraid of almost everything. So, but also the thunder snow. What has shocked me about that is how quickly weather people on the news started just referring to it as if it were this thing that had been around for like yesterday's thunder snow. Even though I think it's just kind of a new thing, thunder snow, or it was then. Anyway, I want to just read a few poems, and I'm going to read some poems from my newest book. And I wasn't. I put a link in the chat if you're interested in finding that. So the first poem I'll read is the last poem in Little Doomsday Clock. It's called Toxic Assets. Stroke the 12th. Vast forests have already been sacrificed in the marble halls of the bad bank for this. Now that portions of the glacial ice have calved to reveal stone that hasn't been exposed for thousands of years, in the secret history of my left eye, which turns incidentally emptied and black, like the Xeroxed surface of a book, coastal cities simply vanish into the sea. The planet's been knocked off its orbit by half a kilometer. And here, behind this terraqueous globe, under great pressure, I have stored away the tiny pearl of your face. If I were the death of ice, I'd calve. If I were deep waters, the birth of flesh would be whispered in overtones of fire. If I were Corpus Christi, I'd simply vanish into the sea. I'm going to read a poem entitled Occupation Dreamland, which is for one of my close friends, closest friends, Garrett Scott. He was an incredible documentary filmmaker. He made a film about that guy who stole a tank in San Diego in the mid-90s. And then he went and he embedded in Fallujah with the 82nd Airborne. He made this beautiful film about being there with, it was right before Fallujah exploded, literally. He then came home, made the film, and 2 days before it won a huge award, he died in a swimming pool of a heart attack. So I want to read you this. It's called Occupation Dreamland, which was the title of his second film. Occupation Dreamland. And some of these poems have footnotes, so I'll just read them, in the course of the poem. Occupation Dreamland. For Garrett Scott, November 19th, 1968 to March 2nd, 2006. Isn't it amazing? The marketplace, despair, consumer impulses, climate, grief, the occupation of a country, pain, this isolated episode of transient global amnesia was us. 5:52 p.m., 24th June, 2013. Those boys, the ones you filmed in Fallujah, they were drowning too. That's why when they patrol the streets of that desert city in night vision, in your film, I can't watch it anymore, not without feeling this pressure behind my eyes and inside my ears, for softly then you opened your mouth inside the God, at the bottom of the deep end, breathed a huge lungful of water. But in here, the sunlight slides in at an angle through the leaded windows to the rustling of fir needles. And here I am at a writer's colony 6 weeks after I met Lieutenant Basic at your wake, on crutches because they had to amputate his foot. It's unthinkable. To be the very first to have filmed an IED exploding not 60 feet away from your Humvee, only to return to San Diego a year later and have a heart attack in a swimming pool. Lie back, turn onto one side, carry a palm across my chest in a freestyle crawl. The pressure just grows. When I press my palms to my ears and cry out, trying to feel each auricle with fluid submerged, all I can hear is each second, curiously undoing the next. But instead of water flooding into your lungs, it's sunlight. God's syrup comes streaming through this window. Released from that moment, your heart exploded without a sound, though my eardrums are ringing still. From that place where you wait at the deep end without a body, fill this room with shining. There's a crucifix on the wall, missing its Christ. I wait here too in an empty bed. A human pudding, the ooze in your golden locks has been laved into a nectar scratched by the scamper of a squirrel's feet on a copper roof. The sound of those locks being picked. Open up. But God will still be screaming at his feet, deaf. This clothed, naked ape still occupying the bed instead of ash, chips of bone preserved in honey in a funeral urn. And your body sinks so decisively to the bottom, even though they've already divided up your ash between them. One syllable cancels out the next to the tune of the sidling light, the purling of a turtle dove, the weeping horses. It is blood that is streaming and blood that is spilled. You can see right through it, like water or air, having passed back through my lungs, and so it has been twice made, at the exact same weight we shared, 49 kilos, once for you, once for me, and the balance of that weight now is 0. I can feel it, a little tremolo when I talk. And if somebody has been erased, replaced by these glittering needles, then it isn't hard to imagine that everything just this once has been uncreated, especially this copper light. that kneeling inside of it would be like kneeling underwater, and to cry out when you did as it withdrew, leaving behind this alienated substance in the place of your body in which I lie. It's like touching the copper mask of my own face, through which I can see drops of sap burning in the late light, a sleek honey eater balanced with its tail against the trunk. There's a tiny waterfall in the distance, silent and white. I have come to occupy this body for a while, where the smeared face of it goes on this piece of paper. I have many faces, but only one is branded to my skin, even as the light completes its favorite trick of draining away. The occupation begins now. In a darkened room, I am wakened again into my fear of touch. I'm going to read a poem. I'm writing a lot of poems by taking phrases from Thomas Jefferson's writings. So I think of it as like the collected poems of Thomas Jefferson. And although I still admire Jefferson in some ways, I've learned some things about him that for some reason I don't like anyway. So what I did with this is I took the Declaration of Independence, especially the parts that were cut out. Those parts had to do with the institution of slavery. And then I added in some other phrases by him. And it's called Erased from the Declaration of Independence. And there's a little sort of chapter introduction. Erased from the Declaration of Independence, in which young Master Jefferson, with ink and goose feather quill, soaking his feet in ice water at dawn, discovers certain truths and erased people from across the years, along with phrases later struck from the Declaration. As a 15-year-old, Robert Hemings serves him cup after cup of steaming tea, and sunlight streams a manumitted frame of words through the buckled glass and into America, from Shadwell to Williamsburg, Philadelphia to Monticello, Washington to Poplar Forest, from Paris to Charlottesville to America. Inherent, and by a self-assumed power continually begun, we utterly dissolve people. I had the happiness yesterday of receiving my daughter and carrying them into slavery at the expense of our own blood. Her distress will be in the moment of parting, the channel, to keep open a market where men should be bought. This being the day my daughter would be crossing the channel and sold. I had calculated the course and ships of war from Dover to Calais to restrain this execrable commerce, but her own heart. Number of souls in my family in Albemarle, 117, free, 34, slave, 83. Those numberless afflictions of all ages and sexes, taxable items and treasure, and sometimes the tithes only, therefore will give us 259,230 slaves. Future ages will scarce believe men should be bought and sold. These liberties are the disturbers of our harmony, land being abundant. We could have been people. For in a warmer climate, no man will labor for himself to purchase that liberty, who can make another labor for him. Slaves pass by descent and dower as lands do in ships of war. Millions have been brought to and born in America, be it so, of which he has deprived them. Purchased a Negro man against human nature itself. Phil of Dabney Minor for my sister Carr for $81. And happiness. Part June 27, 1776, and eat out their substance, well aware that Almighty God, to restrain this execrable, hath created the slave rising from the dust, people, the mind free, powers of the earth, has waged cruel war, and happiness we hope shall be left free. We could have been a great and mighty market, where men in their transportation thither in the warfare of the Christian and murdering the people upon whom he also is now exciting these very people to rise in arms among us. Passports for 2 months, 1787, July 1st, Pettit, Polly J, and Sally Hemings, who mean to be free in another hemisphere, are transitory, and they transact nature together without staining the blood of the master when made free. I have put my seal to this present deed of manumission, thus paying off former crimes to abandon persons formed in slavery is like abandoning children, is now a history, an absolute tyranny. Under the mild treatment our slaves receive, their wholesome, though coarse food, their griefs are transitory. Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, is now exciting these very people to purchase liberty by murdering people. Is the spirit of the master, the repetition of injuries, the fate of millions unborn hanging on the tongue of one man. I tremble that God is the proportion between free inhabitants in a state of dissolution and slaves and happiness apart. I had calculated the course from Dover to Calais, this being the day my daughter would be crossing, and was watching the wind when your favor of the 6th was put into my hands. In this case, some woman who has had the smallpox must attend to her or incur miserable death. A careful Negro woman, as Isabel, for instance, is warfare. I have manumitted Robert Hemings, son of Betty Hemings, so that in future, to forget our former love, we might have been a free Isabel and great people together. An inhuman practice once prevailed of making slaves in this country. We must therefore hold them in peace. I had the happiness yesterday of receiving my daughter. Her distress will be in the moment of parting, this being the day. Isabel, together, or Sally will come. I think that's enough, right? Is that good enough? Thanks. Thank you, guys.
Fabulous reading, Sam. Powerful. Okay. About D.A. Powell. For a while, Doug Powell was the Briggs Copeland Lecturer in Poetry at Harvard. Before that, he was a Bay Area poet, and afterwards, he got to move back to his soul home of San Francisco. But what good luck it was to be in Boston when Doug was regularly giving readings from cocktails, and afterwards, because he is so loved here, he came back to read from Chronic and Useless Landscape or A Guide for Boys. For me, hearing and reading Doug was an ear-opening experience. I did not know that poetry did not have to choose between experimental energy and the lushness of language, things on display in his phantasmagoric poems about listening to Lips Inc. or watching the Poseidon Adventure, and heartfelt candor and honesty about anything that ever happened that you care about. I also did not know you could be a metaphysical poet today, a John Donne or a Marvell, while clocking a hottie on the red line or negotiating the pill fields and dilemmas of being HIV positive. Doug Powell joyous and laughing in life were a poem or events of poetry. When he was a poet around here, my friends and I looked up to Doug as somebody whose thinking and feeling have elements of grace and graciousness, of earthiness and honesty and invention that we would aspire to. His books are available from Grey Wolf. Order them if you have not already read them. I've already mentioned that he and Sam Witt are great poetry friends, Southern poets who met in Iowa. Once when Doug was visiting Boston and being put up at a fairly fancy hotel in Harvard Square, I was delighted to hear them trade anecdotes about eating squirrel stew. According to Doug, the only problem was you need so many squirrels because there is hardly any meat on them. If I had not already been a fan of Doug's work, I would have become a fan right then. Thank you for being here, Doug, and for the full range of your poetry, from the spirit to the body, and for all your wit and invention.
David, thank you. Am I unmuted?
No, you're live.
Oh, good. All right. I saw some prompt to unmute myself, and I pressed a button and then didn't know if I was unmuted. I'm going to read a couple of poems from this chapbook, which came out last year, which probably nobody got because, it came out last year during the plague. This was done by Rescue Press, and all of the proceeds, like every penny from sales of this chapbook, goes to Youth Speaks, which is a Bay Area based organization that uses poetry to give students, young people, a place to speak their minds, to live their truths, and an alternative to other kinds of after school activities. Can I put the link in the chat? Yes, I can do that. I'll do it afterwards. I'm not very good at doing two things at once. This is called A Body Discovered. Until love seals me in a bag inside a heavy morgue drawer and tags me, I am anyone's paramour. Butterfly among the marigolds. In the impossible summer city, I find your dumb boy bottom hanging out your dungarees, catching frisbee or something. It looks like you've got a little son. I don't care how much you don't love me. I am thy inconstant sparrow. Until you hear the loose seed of milk vetch rattle in the pod, that's how blue the long sky. There is yet no hawk's eye waiting. But the great monster will come to take me someday. When it tears me, don't look. When it tears me with its hard hooks, don't look. Do not resuscitate. I know the fog lets loose in wisps. They are the shape of moss on live oak limbs. I'll tell you when to code. All of these poems take their titles from the chapter titles on the DVD version of the movie The Last of Sheila. But other than that, they really have nothing to do with the movie. This is called Puzzle Pieces. They haven't invented a morning after pill that actually gets rid of the morning after, as long as we're talking about where I've been. Down to the Easy Stop Market to grab some buds. That's when I ran into Hot Check Hannah, who wrote, you guessed it, a hot check, and got me some smokes. Somehow I still had $5 when I got to the bar. I wish I'd had it when I left. I could have used $5. I'm not even gonna tell you what it was like to fuck in Eddie's trailer, or Eddie's friend's trailer. Different Eddie, different trailer. God knows where he is now. Once we were close enough to give each other lice. The future is the present we leave for others. Besides the complications, there were bodies, the wonder of bodies, the misery of bodies. Oh, time, you done robbed me blind. And I'm going to read, it's the last poem in the collection. Oh, it's the penultimate poem in the collection. I lied. This is called Agreed on the Basics. And if you know anything about the movie, The Last of Sheila, you know that Agreed on the Basics comes near the end because they're figuring out the crime. It's always a crime. Who wouldn't want to be lost in the clouds? They hide so much. They raise the eucalyptus hills, the radio tower. Even a lad in fluorescent green can go missing. Clouds rolled in upon his head. He wasn't dead, but not alive. He went to limbo, as all good pagans did. The towhead, dead, not dead. The news blew in and out all day. Impossible to know which way to dress. Then there were so many other deaths who could keep track. Well, there were gods in the clouds and they kept track. They watched out. He was snatched up by something beautiful and deadly. That one-eyed monster, love, who swallows every eve doth serve. And now there is the sun, the sweet sun we thought we'd lost. I was just hiding, he says. Oh, if he only says that. And then I'm going to read a couple of new poems, one of which I'm not even sure is any good. But, you know, isn't that what you come to a poetry reading for? To get the things that might never see the light of day. I was just having fun with this. I started writing it at a store called Target. Has anyone heard of this store? I think they're all over. And I was just kind of fascinated by this Target store that was occupying a space that was originally inhabited by another store that I used to shop at that was very similar to Target. And I thought, well, maybe Target is sort of a self-perpetuating thing. So this takes as its form sort of, you know, the story, there's the song, there's a hole in the bottom of the sea and everything keeps getting added to the hole. This is called Target. There's a Target in the commercial space that was Mervyn's next to the Best Buy. There's a Target, there's a Starbucks in the Target that used to be Mervyn's, which is next to the Best Buy that used to be Good Guys. They have Wi-Fi in the Starbucks in the Target that was Mervyn's that's next to the Best Buy. And a guy wearing Dockers wants the password to the restroom and the password to the Wi-Fi in the Starbucks in the Target next to Best Buy. And a guy in an iZod with an iPod has his earbuds in and his grinder open in line for a mocha in the Starbucks in the Target that was Mervyn's right next to the Best Buy. And a guy in a tease having Tivana tea while he scrolls through the trolls on his feed at the Starbucks at Target, formerly Mervyn's next to Good Guys, now a Best Buy. The Best Buy date on this cake pop must have passed in the last few weeks because it reeks, says a man who is standing in line and talks loudly to no one in particular, and who'll end up alone with his bistro box in the Starbucks in the Target next to Best Buy. You've got a target on your back, says a mom to her kid wearing Target gear on Geary and Masonic outside the Starbucks that's in the Target. And I'm not sure if she means Target as in Target Market or as in Target or just Target. Like one day he might end up dead in the Starbucks or dead in the Best Buy or dead from the Good Guys who are patrolling the lot, drinking Starbucks outside. Target outside Best Buy with their lattes in to-go cups because they're always ready to roll with a gun and a cinnamon roll. Okay, honest to God. Yes, no, because I can just throw it away. It's okay if no one has a strong opinion. My opinion's still out on it myself. All right, and then I'm gonna finish with two shorter poems that actually started from the same draft. Has anyone ever had that happen where you've got one thing that you're writing and it turns into two very separate poems? This first one is called I Can't Get Started, which hopefully you know is a song by Vernon Duke and Ira Gershwin. I can't get started. I made a playlist of songs I'd heard in heaven, mostly to procrastinate the letters of rec, due soon, the notes to thank Saeed and Deborah, an intro to a talk, the announcement of the talk, and a talk itself, though not the talk I'm talking about, a different talk. Homeless is the heart, I'd call it, the talk I've yet to write and yet to talk. Uncertain is the mind. I remember a time I had no desk to clutter, no meals and no regular address. Just the crushed can car I slept in. A town so small a wind had nothing to scatter when it blew through. I parked myself on the farthest side of the levee, away from homes, and watched the river riffle slowly over cowbelly silt. Listened for scops or cops on patrol, the music of heaven so far away. The sounds of earth are hard to find and harder still to catalog. A hard field amplifies each hornet. A woman I knew not well, but well enough, she considered me a last resort, someone to escort her to a movie down in Sac. I had no sense even. Scraped the last of it out of the glove box to buy cigarettes. So I declined. And every whisper being overheard, in turn, another woman asked how come I'd turned the first one down, then gave me a 10. Oh, but I can't, I said. I can't pay this back. I have no job and don't know when. But don't you understand, she said, when someone just wants to give. She gave me such a look and a stick of gum. This is the thank you note I haven't written. This is the talk I have yet to give some future me, a scattered kid. I'll name it after a song by Diz.
Wow.
Oh, so this is the last one. Thank you for the wow, though. I love getting the wow factor. So this grew out of that same draft and became a very different poem. And it's called The State Theater, which was the first place that I worked where I got a paycheck that was actually a paycheck and not just, like some bills in an envelope or no envelope. The State Theater. The State Theater, sorry. Where's my manners? The State Theater. Raiders of the Lost Ark on screen number 3, The Empire Strikes Back on the main screening room, and Cannonball Run 2 on screen number 2, any of which I could see free. Plus popcorn if I brought my own bag, and sodas if I brought my own cup. $3.35 an hour, and all I had to do was tear tickets, kill roaches if they ran across the lobby, sweep, kick Mr. Fidget out when he took out his weenus, inventory the hot dogs, the buns, the cups, the lids, the bags of pre-popped popcorn, the bags, the butter, the Whoppers, the Junior Mints, restock, close up, and open the emergency doors when the air conditioner broke, which happened all summer, while the same 3 films played 4 times a day, 5 on the weekends. The midnight feature was 18 and over, softcore and mostly couples, by which I mean men with women or women with men. My uniform was a tie and a badge with a name on it, not even mine, a character from Crime and Punishment. I wasn't stupid. I got cruised by a Russian man and an English teacher, possibly others. I wasn't always paying attention. gave notice and got fired in the same week as one did when the school year started. No hard feelings. That's showbiz. That's it. Did I lose you?
Oh, that was fabulous, Doug. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my God, it's great to hear you read again. So, right outside my door, all of a sudden, there's like 10, 15-year-olds talking. So I'm gonna go and tell them to get out of my yard. 1 second.
This is tonight's real show.
Okay. Didi Jackson's new book. I first heard Didi Jackson read at Holy Cross back in 2019. Didi's poems that night sounded searingly beautiful and heartbreaking. Now her new book, Moonjar, is out. And I could say that the poems are those things and more. Here's one way of summarizing her book. What does a lyric poet with a great gift for pure evocation and the mastery of metaphor to register what we feel, what we need, and how we balance those things together? A poet who can write about the Florida sandhill crane in a way that would make Marianne Moore want to write a poem about the same bird, or rather to abandon the poem she was already writing about this bird. A poet who can register the song of a cardinal, or the emotional fields of a Mark Rothko painting, or the overlapping of stones in a mountain river. What does a poet do with enduring grief and strong love when dealt the absolute necessity of writing about the death of a marriage, of a troubled husband, to the violence and anger of suicide, and then experiences the space and comfort of a new and nurturing love and new marriage, when the terms and truisms of grief and relief and consolation are clouds that need her art of poetry? And moreover, how does one write about these things in a way that satisfied self-necessity and the need to break silence for others who have suffered a similar loss, a loss or trauma of their own? So many great poems here answer these questions better than any I can imagine. Thank you for being with us from Tennessee today, Didi.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, David. And it was so good to hear Cassandra and Jonathan read, and Mark, disembodied Mark, and then also Sam and Doug and Major in a minute. So I hope my Wi-Fi holds on, and as we all do, I guess, these days. And I have a little terrier dog who runs around and sometimes gets needy in a minute, like randomly. So if you do hear a little barking, his name's Finn. So I always like to give warning to that. So thank you. I thought I'd read a handful of poems from Moonjar, which thank you for talking about, so lovely about Moonjar. And then I too have a couple poems that are new from a new manuscript, and a poem that I wrote just a couple days ago because we had a tree cut down, and I wrote a poem about it, our tree getting cut down, because I was really sad to see it go, but it was necessary. So that's my goal. All right, so my first poem is going to be Signs for the Living. Sometimes after the last snow in May, after the red-winged blackbird clutches the spine of the cattail, after he leans forward, droops his wings, and flashes his epaulets, I imagine shouldering the yellow center lines of the road. Near the recently thawed pond, within a long channel of construction, a man holding a sign. One side says slow, the other stop. Joy and sorrow always run like parallel lines. Inside the house, When I leave the lights on, small white moths come like a collection of worship, pulsing their wings up and up the window as if in a frenzied trance-like dance. Some dervishes, others the penitent on shaky knees. The first few years after my husband's suicide, I wanted to be the penitent. I thought I deserved all the pain I could feel. The drill of roadwork in the late summer was a welcome grinding music. Now the yellow center lines are flung like braids behind me. I went back so many times on which poems to read tonight. I changed my mind like 20 times, I swear, even as I was listening. So I was like, oh, ekphrastic, I'll read an ekphrastic. Oh, travel, I'll read some travel. You know, it's so funny how, you know, you want to read in the moment. The next is titled, I'm gonna go to Italy, Ribollita. Is the title. And I don't really need to explain it because the poem explains what ribollita is if you don't know the soup. In a Tuscan farmhouse, I cook ribollita, a peasant soup of white beans, crumbled bread, and kale, as the Campanile di San Biagio rings in the centuries. Though not Catholic, maybe not even a Christian, I kneel in the shadow of this church. I look deep inside the sleeves of a sweater I've worn too many months. After taking his own life, the husband I knew burned in a box I chose from several boxes. I also chose his clothes, the urn, and in the end, asked for him to look like death, not a false life. Yet here I am, considering a soup hundreds of years old, the golden altar of the Madonna de Bon Viaggio, and the sound of bells in the lower fields near our farm. I know the path to San Biagio like I know the roof of my own mouth. Bells like foil between my teeth, electric. The scent of footprints might confuse the dead, but each night I end up between the sheets, windows open in the last hour of lovemaking among bed bugs and common centipedes. In my new husband's arms, trafficking old scars, I hear the prune plums fall from the trees. I will collect and skin them in the morning. And then I thought I would read the golden shovel that you mentioned, if I can find it, right just before Sam read, and I thought I would read that poem. There it is, Golden Shovel Buddha. A warrior I am not. Even when I try my hardest, I am a disciple of we, a follower of union, and I speak clearly of the rickshaw of love to anyone who will listen. Each of us must come to the edge of the other, either in this life or the next. Ours is a marriage sifted from mistakes and old voices, ticked like a wristwatch. A reminder we are on a well-worn path, king-sized and cherry, like a carved Buddha reclining in a gift shop window, whose little hands are like all hands, full of patience and a little gruff. And the Gwendolyn Brooks line is from Beverly Hills, Chicago. When we speak to each other, I said ours, but our voices are a little gruff. That part of the line, yeah. I'm gonna read my last poem from Moonjar. I'll read the title poem, which is the last line. There's the terrier. If you can hear him in the background, I can hear him. Okay. Moonjar. My wedding ring is missing one small diamond, and I like it that way. A reminder of the imperfect in all of us, like that keyhole size of grief that remains crystalline. In Korea, ceramicists for centuries have made moon jars, testimony to the virtue of modesty, asymmetrical warping on the wheel, slumping in the pine-heated kiln, impurities when fired, black dots and pocks on its surface like freckles on skin. I have been kept awake so many nights by the moon, its pull on the pines and night birds, and who, like a monk, keeps a sharp order of time. Never a perfect sphere, the milky moon jar joins two clay hemispheres into one. When the light of the moon finds me, I am the color of everything in the winter night. Let's see. I thought, since the season is turning to fall, I would read a poem about fall, titled "Fall," of all things, with an epigraph by Louise Glick, and it says, "Do you know what I was, how I lived?" It is a goldfinch, one of the two small girls, both daughters of a friend, sees hit the window and fall into the fern. No one hears the small thump, but she, the youngest, sees the flash of gold against the mica sky as the limp feathered envelope crumples into the green. How many times in a life will we witness the very moment of death? She wants a box and a small towel, some kind of comfort for this soft body that barely fits into her palm. Its head rolling side to side, neck broke, eyes still wet and black as seed. Her sister, now at her side, wears a dress too thin for the season, white as the winter only weeks away. She wants to help, wants a miracle. Whatever I say now, I know weighs more than the late fall's layered sky, the jeweled leaves of the maple and elm. I know too, it is the darkest days I've learned to praise. The calendar packages up time, the days shrink and fold away until the new season. We clothe, burn, then bury our dead. I know this, they do not. So we cover the bird, story its flight, imagine his beak singing. They pick the song and sing it over and over again. So this is my second to last poem. It's a poem I wrote this summer. We were in Greece this summer during that little bitty window that everybody had where we all felt pretty safe to do things. And that window really closed kind of quickly, but it was kind of that really nice feeling. And the title is Glowing with Joy, which is the saint of this town we were in. It's the patron saint of the town, Saint Halabos. It's his name translated. And I don't think I need to give any more information on this, except that it was a Greek Orthodox church that it was in, a million icons. And the Theotokos is an image of Mary, like a throned image of Mary, and often Jesus is on her lap. So glowing with joy, with an epigraph by Fernando Pessoa, I bear the wounds of all the battles I've avoided. I pause and light a candle as I enter St. Halabos, whisper a small prayer, something that might match the smell of incense and stillness. I'm alone in this church, so I sit in the nave, under the dome, under hundreds of eyes, the bodies frozen in moments of wonder or awe or torture or merely life on each inch of the walls. Outside, the wind rips against the marble, but the Theotokos sits still as a cat in the apse above the altar, her baby with one arm raised, like lifting a tiny flag, as two angels with arched backs flank the pair, their bodies manifesting the questions we all have. So how do we endure this suffering? Halabos flayed alive, thanking his torturers for scraping off his body and renewing his soul. And though the saint can protect from the plague, the walls here are spotted with mold, already eating at the gowns and the stiff floating bodies, the paint peeling like small wounds, And since I'm alone, I consider these wounds, spores lodged inside us. This is when I can't see the whole, only cell next to cell next to cell, like the row of images on the iconostasis, each their own story of suffering, so specific, part of all suffering. Why we remember decapitated heads and severed arms, saints who lost their eyes, their breasts, their tongues. What is our suffering then? The voices of workers on midday break filter in with the clerestory's light as they take a beer or two in the nearby cafe. And the swallow still glides under, like a blessing, under the growing vault of the portico, her babies calling with gurgles, liquid and joyful. And the last poem I'll read is the poem of Magnolia Tree, and it's a short poem, but I feel now I really feel obligated to read it since I mentioned that we had a tree. So we had this giant magnolia tree cut down, it died. The people before us here put a patio in and destroyed the roots. So we had to have it cut down. But that alone was really fascinating to watch in itself, that whole process of taking a giant couple-story high tree down. So the magnolia tree. Tiny pieces of wood rocket sky high from the chipper like ticker tape at Carnival, as two men and one woman solemnly feed each dismembered bough into the hungry gas-powered mouth. Even neighbors gather, mourning in the streets, the old magnolia, as a light rain hushes the spray of sawdust. Another crew snakes a rope around the waist of the tree, and once cut from the stump, the body is raised like a steeple when crane lifted up to set above the belfry. And for a moment, we are all at church until clouds pass like continents, turgid, tumescent, and I can't wait for it all to be over. Nothing to be left to remind me that I let something I love die again. The trunk, stiff as a corpse, echoes like a bomb when it lands on the truck bed, where it will be cut smaller and smaller, finally becoming firewood to torch someone's night. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Didi. And that last poem's amazing. Stephanie Burt says that in order to be a major poet, you need to be able to write 5 or 6 kinds of poem. By that reckoning, Major Jackson is a major poet, because I can't even count the number of kinds of poems he can write. As anybody who has read, say, Hoops, Holding Company, Roll Deep, and now The Absurd Man, a book in which Major's cosmopolitan side and worldly and humane grasp of multiple landscapes from Philadelphia to Vermont to China and levels of connectivity is on display. I've not heard anybody say that there is a Horatian strain in contemporary American poetry for a while, but there is a truly Horatian strain in Major's work. He's a master of the verse letter, for one thing, and he is a great poet of friendship. I'm thinking of a poem about driving around Franconia, New Hampshire with the poet Matthew Dickman, but I'm also thinking of his elegies, and I'm thinking of how when I read Major Jackson's work, I feel that as a reader, I'm put in the trusted and needed position of being a friend. You Reader is the title of one poem. And when he writes that for this, the other major needs a lot of sky. You are that sky. There is a beautiful familiarity of not the infinite, not the Larkin sky, but of friendship sun-warmed in appropriate distances. The Absurd Man has a streak of Camus in it, and nothing was better to read than Camus during the last few years. Camus with his sense of human-sized resistance and his knowledge that to win is not to defeat, but to endure, to push back in freedom, to be accountable to everybody in oneself, and to be open. To see the self against the frozen self, the totalitarian self, the self that lies as absurd is just accurate, and humility is absurd, and so is delight. and it leaves room for delight, the loophole. And when we read Walcott and Heaney, those cosmopolitans, we think of Frost, and Major Jackson visits Frost where he lives, and he has his reserve and his delight to push back at the horrible parents at a youth soccer match in Vermont in a way that I feel is beautiful and frosty. In a poem for Derek Walcott, Major remembers Walcott saying of another poem that he is deep in poetry. What a good description also of Major Jackson in his new work and his recent books. The things that poetry can do and be are here. There's responsibility and reckoning with failure, love poetry, the country we live in with its stupidity that friendship opposes by being real, loss, and also deep pleasure in the capaciousness of poetry and pleasure for us in Major Jackson's poetry. So thank you for being here with us from Tennessee.
Thank you, David. Wow, that's such an honor, and what a pleasure to be reunited in a way with Sam and Doug, and Didi's upstairs, of course, and maybe she'll turn off her camera so that I won't have an unstable connection. Yeah, I remember reading Sam's first book, Everlasting Quell, and knew I would be reading him for a long time. And Doug was one of my earliest publishers, Electronic Poetry Review, if I remember correctly. And David, your work is in friendship, even from afar, even moments like this here at Lit Balm, just feels quite special, and an extension of what I have already encountered of you on the page. And thank you, Lit Balm folks. What a great series you have here, and it's my deep honor. Didi and I moved to Nashville last fall. In fact, it was a year ago today we discovered that we signed signed on a house. Wow, what a change! 18 years in northern New England to Nashville. I'm gonna start off with a poem called Nashville Sonnet Deconstructed on a Bed of Magnolia Blossoms. In this city, no one talks dialectical materialism anymore. From high up, the cranes speak an invisible language. The trusses extend over pedal taverns and tractors, joyriding flatbeds of dancing tourists. And it is like reading God's lips. On guard, she says. Today, I am landscaping, staking light across my wintergreen yard to get the worm's perspective, to beg his forgiveness. I am reaching fingers into darkest soil. A house wren flouts its surefire code to all this achy, breaky singing. Such intricate phrasing, like a compass beneath Giacomo's heart. Who doesn't want to live in a city of acoustic martyrs addicted to heartbreak? Plus this, even the magnolias, homeless and vulnerable each spring, court despair. Still, they burst their creamy, fat blossoms like spark plugs for the living. Okay, I got a warning about my connection, so hopefully I can make it. I can make it through. Yeah, it's been great here. I'm going to start writing song lyrics, and I feel it. It's going to come. I'm going to read 2 poems from The Absurd Man, which came out last year, right at the beginning of the pandemic. And I'm gonna read hopefully a few poems that you haven't heard before. When you have a book out this long, you've read so many of the poems so many times that you want to hear something new. So I'm gonna try and read something that I rarely read, a poem called Paper Money. You know I don't read it if I can't find the page. There it is, 79. Okay, paper money. Like whatever fires that chose us, I kept coming back to that foamy wake of water where she kicked, and not so much distracted as suddenly pledged to observe, heard where once were beaten waves, tranquil breathing, my own. Isn't this the nature of repose when one's life is a matinee for all the professors starved for divinity? Sometimes we stand together in checkout lines in feverish objectivity. The puzzle of bagging a life so that unbagging does more than reverse, like Orpheus, but cast us forward to some future communion. When the cashier asks, how will we be paying? I pull out of my front pocket poems and more poems. The flaneur tends a well-liked summer cocktail. The flaneur tends a well-liked summer cocktail curbside on an ARP-like table. He's alone, of course, in the arts district, as it were, legs folded, swaying a foot so that his body seems to summon some deep immensity from all that surrounds. Dust shadows inching near a late 30-ish couple, debating the post-galactic abyss of sex with strangers. Tourists ambling by, only to disappear into the street's gloomy mouth. A young Italian woman bending to retrieve a dropped Metro card, its black magnetic strip facing up. A lone speckled brown pigeon breaking from a flock of rock doves, then landing near a crushed fast food wrapper newly tossed by a bike messenger. The man chortling after a sip of flaxen-colored beer, remembering that in the Gospel of John, the body and glory converge, linked to incarnation, and so perhaps we manifest each other. A tiny shower of sparks erupting from the knife sharpener's truck, who daily leans a blade into stone. A cloudscape reflected in the rear windshield of a halted taxi where inside a trans woman applies auburn lipstick. The warlike insignia on the lapel jacket of a white gloved doorman who, opening a glass door, gets of a dowager's thick perfume and recalls baling Timothy hay as a boy in Albania. The woman distractedly watching a mother discuss Robert Colescott's lurid appropriations of modernist art over Niçoise salad suddenly frees her left breast from its cup, where awaits the blossoming mouth of an infant wildly reaching for a galaxy of milk. The sharp coughs of a student carrying a yoga mat. The day's last light edging high rises on the west side so that they seem rimmed by fire. Just when the man says, and yet amidst the wages we pay, boarding the great carousel of flesh. I'm gonna read two more poems, and I keep getting a warning, so I'll cut this short just so that I'll read 2.5 more poems. 10 album covers. 1, the future is a nameless blind piano man fingering some groove out of dead art from the Roman Empire. 2, this summer, I did my best to forget the moon, chalky-faced traveler of the skies, but remained a prisoner of his dusty metaphors. 3, when I can't sleep, I count all my likes. 4, this morning, I read Zagajewski, who recently vanished into a theory of light. I am sure I treasure most his precision, which, like my belief in art and physics, seems endless. 5, on the kitchen counter right now, 3 sunflowers in a clear vase, stretching the day into a single filament of wonder. 6, no one knows why sometimes when reading a book, the face contorts into a golden wildfire at night. 7, what I am talking about is my funeral, where all the pallbearers are Yoruba priestesses, passing my body like a sacrifice through a field of summer. 8, the fate of the living is to abandon their accents, our first instruments, then to return home years later to retrieve them. 9, tack this up on your wall. I want you to feel this energy. Cell phones burning over a city. 10, a fox is a suffering creature fossilized in the fingers of a piano player, exploding into a feverish rift, drowning God's hungers. Climate, and this will be my last poem. Climate, this is what the heart knows. A ramekin of warm peach cobbler crowned with the splodge of vanilla, whose slow melt is the altering of the seasons. The coming of autumn, swirling in a mass of milky orange sugar. Bach's Sonata No. 1 in B minor, its opening movement, a sojourn reminiscent of December rain, or my grandfather, graveside, alone, his frightened stare into a dirt hole, recalling his eras. The heart knows the spine as the exquisite corridor to the senses, noodle-like strands registering the tingling of beach pebbles underfoot, or a courageous plunge into an iron-cold sea, or the way you feel when she pulls her favorite lichen green dress over her head, rivering her body, a fabric waterfall across the heart, which also knows Orpheus's frantic reach, Bernini's depiction of Pluto's marble white fingers grasping Proserpina's thigh in the Borghese, or Venus's shattering tennis swing, her victorious scream. But the heart does not know the primordial danger of living, wildfires scattering like the devil's breath, hurricane winds drowning castles to make skeletons of us all, which is why we devour and swallow earth like vultures on a highway, standing around, waiting our turn. Thank you, good people.
Thank you, Major. That was fabulous. Thank you, everybody, for reading. And now, before we do at the end of our program, we have short readings, one poem each by a couple of other poets who you're going to want to hear more of. So my friend Jordan Davis is going to be reading from poem. He's got a great book coming out with Mad Hat that I'm very excited about. And then 3 poets who are wonderful poets who haven't published full-length collections yet, but whose work you can find online, who are great. Sarah Stickney and Kathleen Maris Paltrineri and Jess Feldman in Brooklyn. So Jordan, why don't you read your poem first?
Thanks, David. Let's see, is it, am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
No, I can hear you.
Okay, great. It just said they can't hear you, so I just wanted to make sure. What a great honor. It's lovely to read with Major DA and Didi. Thanks, David. This is a poem from the book. The book has changed titles several times in the last few months, but I think right now it's called Yeah, No. And this poem is called Hidden Poem. In the window, in the shade of a blinder on a horse of porcelain, sewn into a shirt with stripes, among miners in the outback, under the sofa, behind pillows, under blankets, in a clear box across your chest, in the Psalter on a branch in a wig at church, in the basement among wood, with the clouds on cold people at the farm, in a bread bag in a pile in the middle of the room in plain sight, below a flat roof with a gutter, in a snowed under car, in a shoe, in an egg, down the left column in a prison calendar, in love, by the ruins in the budget, in rhyme, indoors by the hawk nests, underneath the tea service, in poison ivy with an accent, along the guardrail, in a filling, elsewhere in your ear. Thank you.
Yeah, nice. Now, my friend Sarah Stickney, I can't remember the name of her chapbook that Tom Lux chose, but is fabulous. And Sarah's in New Mexico.
Can you hear me? Yeah, this work? Thanks. This has been an amazing reading. Really beautiful work by everyone. This poem is called Reader, I Married Him. Redder, I mangled him with my nails. Ravished, I Mapplethorped him. Revelator, I mazed him, rendered him unto Caesar. Ref, I maxed out the clock. Renter, I amortized. I realized I misunderstood him completely. Ragdoll that I am, I merged with him. Ravenous, I munched and munched as I thought of him. Reckless, I margaritaed to revenge myself. Rolfer, I mashed the flesh. Rancid, I minced and pickled. Rampant, I manxed him. And oh, Romeo, I unmanned him. In revels, I maimed us both. Radical, I mapped each lie and line until there was nothing left to mar.
Wow, you see, you want to hear more of that, right? But Sarah's friend Jess Feldman is in Brooklyn, and she's got some really great chat books. And she and Sarah met at the MFA writing program at the University of New Hampshire, where the fourth reader also went. So Jess, take it away.
Wonderful. Yeah, and Sarah's chapbook is Portico. It's a delicious read. I highly recommend it. So I'm going to read a poem called Spring. Obviously, we're in fall, but yeah. A short cedar, presumed dead, sprouted its soft green spines. The frosted peperomia that over winter in the closed, sickly city had shrunk into a dry puddle burst forth with its green tongues. After 2 doses of highly advanced medicine, I swam in the future. Nearly everyone I knew had lived, continued breathing, even if ungrateful. Together again with chicken salad, with small, unresolvable tiffs. In the sudden downpour, 1 fledgling oriole drowned, but 3 more chirped in the branches. That survival could be so sweet, the sun cresting each grumpy head filled with notions of its own future. The tiny ants we tried to poison in the kitchen continue to make my small accidents disappear. Thanks.
Great. Now, Kathleen Maris Peltrineri has been sitting in her car in Iowa, and I believe her car is full of her luggage because she's going to Norway on a Fulbright in a couple of months. Take it away, Kathleen.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, David, for inviting me to read. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. And I remember really fondly you coming to UNH and reading. I don't even know, maybe it was a decade ago or something. But yeah, I'm going to read a poem that was in the penultimate issue of Jubilat, and it's called Yellow and White Plumeria Petals Kaleidoscope Out of My Mouth. There is nothing ethereal about my speaking. This sacrament, this survival, my one true attachment to the world. How can I love a language that's not of the earth I was born to, and yet I do? All the driftless, escaped glaciation, low west, dough of it. We spoke of being each other's saviors, of my body, which became your body, of your word, ocean, 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 loosening from my tongue. Thank you.
So I'm going to turn it back over to Cassandra and Jonathan, who are going to close out the show. So thank you so much for everybody for letting me be here and introducing these great poets. And thank you everybody for showing up and reading such great poems. Made my day, made my week.
Thank you, David. That was fantastic. Don't go yet, because 3 of our regulars are going to read 1 poem each. We're looking forward to some excellent poems. But before we do, I just wanted to mention that next week, Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern, got to make it early because we've got some Europeans, we're going to have the virtual book release party for Getting Away with Everything by Vincent A. Salucci and Christopher Shipman. We're going to have music from Najib Sabor and Willis Gordon, and we'll have readings from Brock Guthrie and Brooke Champagne, as well as the 2 authors, Vincent and Christopher Shipman. It's going to be a great party. It's at 2 p.m. Eastern Time next Saturday. And if you'd like the Zoom room, please go to www.unlikelystories.org. There's a big banner at the top saying, click here for more information about the event, and you can do it. Okay, so first up, we're going to hear from Cindy Hockman, a valued and wonderful regular here at Lit Balm. And I believe Cindy has just got nominated for a push card and is going to read that poem for us. Is that right? Did I hear that correctly?
Well, you know what? I was going to read another one because of Lit Balm, the surrealistic festival we did. You did. I had nothing to do with it, but you did it. I learned about Survision, and I was in a submissive mood one morning, and I submitted to them, and they accepted one of my poems. So I was actually going to read that. However, now that you mentioned the push cart, what the hell? I'll read that one. Thank you, Jeffrey Wright, the one who does the puppets, and he's a great poet himself, great editor of Live Mag, and he nominated this poem, which won't win, but just the nomination is, an honor. Inner life with sabotage. This poem will be intentionally vague. Candle wicks flicker, chemicals misfire, crossed wires refuse to untangle. Sometimes I slip into something less comfortable. Carousel horses and streetlights make me weep deeply. My handsome father's death has turned into stilted breath. My benevolent brother's death is still caught in my throat. Everyone gives me flowers to fill the fissure between limbs and loss, and I bury them under layers of what? Nothing but my own undoing. A startled and startling voice tells me to go even deeper than this. Onyx and obsidian wrestle it out with a chest full of white diamonds. Frankly, my dear, I've had enough of dancing through the murk with my not so better angels. Excuse me while I remove this battering ram from my solar plexus. Let me open my palms to the hazy sunshine. I promise I will stop shaking soon. Thank you.
Cindy, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Next up, we have Bob Heeman reading to us from his famous kitchen. Are you in your kitchen, Bob?
I am, but my camera isn't cooperating. So, after love. After love became the heavy weight that was lifted, and the bellman unlocked the ceiling to reveal the tired egg that was really an avalanche. I drifted back again into my little boat to sleep, until my stomach rang aloud with the message that love was back and angry at the door, refusing to unzip itself until I was again stuck back into the ground, from which I had only so recently strayed. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Very cool.
Thanks.
All right, and we're going to close out with DeWitt Henry. DeWitt, what have you got for us this week? DeWitt, you should be able to unmute yourself at this point, but I'm going to hit ask to unmute.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. I hope this isn't too slow for this crowd. It's called On Skin. In the game, rhinoceros for thickest, smooth and softest, infant cheeks. To skin is to flay, as St. Bartholomew does the artist on the Sistine Chapel fresco, holding up his pelt with features run down, lip and folds. Hairless, scaleless, and vulnerable, we kill and flay animals for hides, make blankets, coats, shelters, drums, shoes, belts, purses, parchment, rugs, and wall hangings. Once ermine-robed in Gerald David's painting, The Judgment of Cambyses, a subordinate judge is stripped, tied down, and skinned alive. 4 separate flayers work. A 5th pulls the left arm taut at King Cambyses' command. The seat for the next judge will be woven from the skin. Centuries later, Nazis adopted Swift's modest proposal, human skin for lampshades. For discipline, give a good hiding. Sure save my skin. Live in your own or jump out of. Uncomfortable in yours? Difference is only skin deep. I got you under my skin, deep in the heart of me. Or here, inked on my bicep, for dogs to peck at. Tattoos, once mainly for sailors, bikers, skinheads, and sideshow ladies, at least in Main Street minds, or for occasional exotics from different cultures, are now popular for millennials. Conversation starters, slogans, and body art. If we can't choose our skins, let's decorate and personalize. Bear your story and truly denote yourself. What's the skinny on that one? It only hurts for a moment, lasts forever, and removal by laser is an emerging enterprise. Baby or babe in birthday suit on bearskin rug. Skin on skin. Skin tight, dress or bathing suit like second skin. Frogman, Salky. Skinny dipping, skin trade. Foreskin, call them all, to cut. Sunscreen to protect from sunburn, blisters, cancer. Tan lines, freeze burn, frostbite, burn victims need grafts. Healthy versus problem, teen skin plagued by acne. Elders prone to scars, creases, sags, tags, and facelifts. MRIs and X-ray vision. We bought our children the visible woman and an anatomical model kit. Its clear plastic shell joined front and back, but first you had to fit in skull and skeleton, then all the vitals like puzzle pieces. Only my surgeon brother could get it right. As for skin privileges, prejudices, and profiling, were all mixed, passing. Otherwise, smoked windows, hoodies, avatars, machine voices, or disembodied words free us to reveal our depths. Thank you.
Do it. Thank you. And thanks so much, David, for organizing this read. Thanks very much to Major and Didi and Doug and Sam for your fantastic readings. Yeah, it was a wonderful show. I was really engaged. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hassan?
Well, I was just going to say, I think that we need to start calling them David Blair extraordinaires. I think that every time we have one of these, they're one of my favorites. It was
Thank
really
you, Sandra.
fantastic.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a good weekend. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Bye, everybody.
Yeah.